All right, folks, we are going to review the Argali Absaroka or Absaroka 4P TP. I just got back from using this on a 12-day mountain hunt in British Columbia. Cue the beauty shots. Before I go any further, I need to let you know, if you stay tuned to this video, I'm going to tell you how you can win a Prime RVX 34 compound bow. Now, I have always been a die-hard freestanding shelter guy for sheep and goat hunts, primarily because you're up above tree line, weather can be extremely demanding, and just for peace of mind and safety, I've always opted for freestanding shelters. This year, I was going on my goat hunt with a buddy of mine, Vance, and Argali dropped the 4P version of their TP system, which is the Absaroka or Absaroka. Actually just came from this mountain range in Wyoming like 4 days ago. The locals call it the Absarokas. So I guess from now on, I will too use the term Absaroka. But I wanted to test this out in some pretty demanding circumstances. And I thought having two guys going on a goat hunt, being in a variety of different terrain at a variety of different elevations, it would be a good opportunity to do so. Now, one note I want to make is that if you are newer to hunting or if you're solo, I still recommend freestanding shelters as having the lowest degree of risk and the highest degree of stability. So overall, I have a very positive review. I'll get into the details shortly, but I don't want people to take this review as my permission to less experienced hunters to just run non-freestanding shelters in extremely demanding circumstances, because you are assuming a degree of risk, and I think it is acceptable for more experienced people, not so acceptable for less experienced people. You might notice my cat, Potato, jumping in the scene from time to time. He's a newer cat. He likes to play with things like tents and strings and whatnot. So if you see him jump up or show up in the background, you now know who he is. His name is Potato. He's a very nice young fellow. We'll try and stay focused during this review. All right, let's jump into the technical specifications. So here we have the insert, the accessory pole, and the shelter itself. Starting off with price, the shell is $398 US, the insert is $205, and the pole is $70. For weight, the shell with the stove jack is 32 ounces. You can shave 2 ounces by taking the stove jack out. The insert is 34 ounces, and the pole is 9.2 ounces. So essentially, if you run the shell with the pole together, it's 40 ounces or 2.5 pounds. And that is the configuration that I recommend most highly. I had kind of two parts to this goat hunt. I took the insert for the first half, didn't take the insert for the second half. Personally, for most applications, I don't think the insert is necessary. There was still a decent amount of bugs on that second half, and I did not really find it an issue. And in fact, I brought some of those mosquito coils with me. And when I got back into the shelter at night, yeah, there'd be some buzzing around at top. I'd burn a mosquito coil for 10 minutes in there. And then I never had to worry about bugs the rest of the night. So you are saving over 2 pounds by not running the insert, and you're actually getting a significant amount of more room as well. Now let's talk about the pole for a second. You can use the Argali attachment system to link two trekking poles together and save yourself 9.2 ounces by not bringing this pole. I don't like my trekking poles to get used up by my shelter because I want them in the day. I want them for hiking, but I also want them for my tarp. Lots of times I got to throw up a glassing tarp, whether it either be for shade or wind or rain. And if both my trekking poles are back at camp, I'm kind of screwed. Now, One situation where I thought it would be acceptable, if you had two guys and you were both using the same trekking pole system and you could leave one pole each back at camp, so you still had one pole to trek with or one pole to set up a glassing tarp, I think that would be an acceptable situation. But for me, I'd rather carry the 9 ounces and have the versatility of keeping my trekking poles with me throughout the day. Let's talk about the material used, because this is where this shelter and other shelters that use sill poly really stand out for me. So a lot of people want to know, how do I feel about this teepee against similar Peaks teepees and similar Seek Outside teepees? Now, I do recognize there's a limited edition Dyneema version of each from both companies, and I think that's a different conversation. But if we're going to talk about the sill nylon versions of Seek Outside teepees, Peaks teepees, or any other teepees compared to the sill poly Argali teepee, I have no interest in testing those other teepees. In my experience and from the data that I have read, sill poly is vastly superior. Now, I'm going to attach links in the bottom description of this video for 2 different articles, one on the Argali site, one on the Durston site, and they both cite the same source materials. I don't want to go too deep in the weeds. Essentially, at face value, nylon appears to be slightly stronger. However, nylon is much more susceptible to damage from UV rays. So as soon as you've set your tent up a couple times, the 1 to 2% strength difference is gone and actually reverses, and the sill poly becomes stronger. Also, polyester is naturally water resistant where nylon is not. And as soon as the sill nylon absorbs that water, it's difficult to dry out, it sags, it loses its shape. Trust me when I tell you, as soon as you run a sill poly shelter, you will never go back. It's just a superior fabric altogether. Now, I will say again, I think Dyneema exists in a category all on its own. I don't think it's perfect, but I do think it has, equal, if not better, water resistant properties to sill poly. It doesn't stretch. There's a lot of great factors of Dyneema, but Dyneema is also incredibly expensive. Now, sill poly does tend to be more expensive and less readily available than sill nylon. And that's why I believe you still see a lot of companies like Seek and Peaks using sill nylon. I think it's cheaper material. I think they can charge more for their shelters and they can still make more money. And so I just think it's a business decision. I think from a technical perspective, I'd be willing to argue with anybody, sill poly is superior to sill nylon, period. That being said, the shelter is made out of a 20D ripstop nylon. As far as the coating, it's a silicon 2000 millimeter treatment, which means it has a hydrostatic pressure or resistance of 2000 mm. And when they coat these fabrics, they coat both sides. So if you see sill or sill PE or sill PU, that means they're using sill is silicon on both sides, and PE could be polyethylene or polyester, and PU could be polyurethane. I don't want to do a super deep dive on silicone impregnation versus the various poly impregnations, but from all the research I've done, silicone impregnation on both sides is marginally superior to some of the newer chemicals that they can impregnate it with to make it more water resistant. Essentially, it lasts longer, it gets in there a little bit deeper, and it provides a higher degree of water resistance per unit of weight, meaning you can use less silicone to get a more resistant material, a more water resistant material than if you were to use a polyether or polyester blend. One note, you still got to seam seal all this stuff. If I was you, I'd give Argali the $40 and let them do it. But if you're a penny pincher and you like to do your own stuff, fair enough. Just remember, to get a fully waterproof shelter, you should seam seal this when it shows up if you don't have them do it. Now, let's talk about ease of setup. This thing goes up in a flash. I'm gonna link Brad's setup video right here, but the basic description is if you take the 4 corners on either side of the doors and just loosely pull the shelter into the shape of a rectangle, not super tight, but just laid out in a straight line, then put your pole in the middle, then put the rest of the pegs in, This thing pitches perfectly every time. I can put it up solo in 2 to 3 minutes. Also, the mesh insert attaches very simply and has some additional guy lines so you can adjust the tension of the floor on the inside and kind of suck it right out to the sides. Having dual doors is super handy because you can come in and out both sides. And if you decide to set up a stove, you can have your stove on one side and load the wood in the back door, and then you and your partner can come in the front door. Also, I notice a lot of people commenting that they're worried about the bigger shelters requiring a bigger flat footprint. Not the case. As long as you can find enough area for your body to be flat, you can pitch this thing on a variety of angles and uneven terrain. There's a lot of slack in all of the guy tie outs that go to your pegs. So you can, suck them up, keep them longer, and account for a variety of different terrains. Now, I want to talk momentarily about weather resistance and durability. I did have a friend who took this out. He got into a lot of wind, some really rough weather, and he piled rocks up on the side of the shelter. And because the wind was blowing and the fabric was rubbing against the rocks, he put holes in his shelter and a bunch of water came in from the rain. And I'd just like to say, don't do that. That doesn't make any sense. If you're worried about your shelter blowing away, you put rocks on top of your pegs, not on top of your shelter. I'm going to get into how to stop condensation, and I actually prefer to lift up my shelter a little bit, but then the wind can come underneath it. So if you're in highly wind-prone conditions, suck the shelter right down to the ground, peg in as good as you can, use all the guy outlines as you can, and then put several rocks on each peg. In my experience, you're going to be fine. I haven't taken this thing through hurricane conditions, but I took it through very healthy wind, and having it set up properly, I had no issues with it whatsoever. It was very durable and it was very weather resistant. Before we get into the next category, I promised I would tell you how you can win a compound bow, so here we go. I am giving away my Prime RVX 34. It's the bow I've been shooting since January. I've been on multiple hunts with it. I killed a giant Vancouver Island coastal black bear at 15 yards with it. I quite like the bow. I leave for moose guiding in 2 days. I'll be gone for 18 days, but when I get back from that session, I will post my review of the bow. Overall, it's a favorable review. As always, I have a few criticisms, but I can safely recommend this is a great bow to purchase. So the only thing you have to do to enter is to be a member at Mindful Reviews. So if you're already a member, you're entered. If you want to become a member, mindful-reviews.com. Go there, join up. You can pick any of the memberships. Anybody who joins between now and December 15th, along with all current members, will be eligible to win the bow. December 16th, I'll put all the members in a hat. I'll pick a name. You win the bow. There's a link to the giveaway details down below. You got any questions, let me know, but I wish you all luck. Let's talk about space a little bit. I'm going to throw in some video here from the goat hunt, and you can see me, my gear, and even my partner inside the tent to give you an idea how much room there is. Let's have a little look-see at what we going on. So we got the Argali Absaroka 4P. I always mess that up. I hope that's what it's called. Here's what we got going on. Inside, tons of room in here. 2 different setups. All right, it's 10:35. I'm back at camp and I had to set up camp. So give you the grand tour. So I've still got the Absaroka 4P, which is way more shelter than one dude needs, but it's the only shelter I had. Lesson learned, I'll bring a spare one. Got the Big Agnes Q-Core SLX, lighting equipment, Enigma down 20 Fahrenheit quilt, all my garbage over here. So technically, the TP is 74 inches high, 130 inches on one side, and 114 inches on the other side. You can easily stand up to get changed if you need to. Like, you kind of bend over a little bit. Obviously, I can't stand right up. But there's room in there to change pants and like do all kinds of stuff. You can walk right into it before you lay down. When you combine the shelter with the pole for a total weight of 2.5 pounds, I actually went in for the second half of my hunt solo, and I took a 2.5 pound shelter and I had a palace. It was incredible. I had all my gear lying all over the place. I didn't have to organize anything. I had my bedroll put out. It was incredibly comfortable, and I had an unbelievable amount of room. I think 2 guys with a stove, no problem. 3 guys without a stove, no problem. For me and Vance, it was an absolute palace. I think if you wanted to go more than 2 dudes on a regular basis, I would move up to the 6P. I tend to kind of cut estimates in half. Like most 2P shelters are good for 1 person. Most 4P shelters are good for 2 people. You can comfortably fit 3 guys in here with no stove, no problem. But if you're going to do it on the regular basis, I would just upsize a little bit. Plus, because you can split up the weight, why not just have a little bit more room? But if you tend to hunt with a partner and every now and then you bring a 3rd or even a 4th, I think this would be a great shelter for that use case as well. Ventilation. This is one of the most commonly asked questions, especially with single wall shelter. How bad is the condensation? Here's the deal. Condensation is always an issue. Condensation is more of a function of the weather conditions. Are you getting inside your tent wet? The ground conditions, is the ground wet before you set up your tent? Most tents, if they want to stay waterproof, do not have phenomenal venting. They'll have like 1 or 2 little vents. It is rarely sufficient to effectively vent all the condensation. What you need is air going through your shelter in order to evacuate the moisture as it accumulates. And this is one of my favorite things about teepees. I choose to pitch them elevated. So I make that center pole maybe an extra couple inches taller. And then what I do is first I pitch it with the pegs tight. Then I elevate that pole and I loosen the guy lines to all the pegs. And then I like to have the skirt elevated 2 to 3 inches off the ground, and you'll get a nice breeze coming in underneath the tent. Now, if it's super windy, not a great idea because you're going to be getting a breeze coming through if it's super windy anyways, and you're going to put a lot more stress on those pegs. And if it's super buggy, you might need to suck it down right to the ground. But in my opinion, a teepee pitched with 2 to 3 inches of space between the edge of the skirt and the ground provides ideal venting to solve any condensation problem. Stove compatibility. Argali sells a titanium stove. You can use any other titanium stove. The stove jack is basically universal. There's tons of room in there for a stove. I think a hot tent is a phenomenal addition to your arsenal for certain types of hunts. I'm not a fan of stoves on backpack hunts because I'm lazy. I would rather use my sleep system to dry out and stay warm. It requires a lower caloric expenditure. I think it's more effective. And I think the heat stove thing is more of a psychological benefit than a physical benefit anyways. However, there are fly-in hunts, truck hunts, lots of other hunts, horse hunts, where you can bring in extra gear where I think stove systems shine. So yeah, fully stove compatible, tons of room for a stove. Highly recommend adding one to your arsenal. Before we get into the rest of the review, I need to share some news. Mindful Hunter Outfitting is now live. I am offering archery mule deer hunts in Alberta and any weapon spring black bear hunts in British Columbia. I have limited spots available on both hunts, 4 available hunts for Alberta and 6 available hunts for BC. I will be guiding all of the BC hunts and half of the Alberta hunts. All the hunts are one-on-one unless you and a friend want to book a 2-on-1, then we can work that out. There's a video right here where I go over all the details. There's several different options for the style of hunt. If you want to go in the backcountry for bear, we can do that. If you're not in great shape and you just want to look for a nice bear and you want to cruise logging roads for bear, we can do that too. We can stay in the base camp with the stove and the big teepee, or we can spike out and hike all day in glass avalanche chutes. Really high quality animals in both areas. A 20-inch skull and a 7-foot bear is not out of the question in the coastal area where I'll be guiding black bear. And there was a 193-inch mule deer taken with Jeff Lander and his client last year, the guy that I bought the area from. So great hunts. I really want to use this as an opportunity to help people get out in the backcountry, spend more time hunting. I think there's a lot of great things in the hunting guiding industry, and I think there's some not great things. And I think with my perspective and my experience, I can offer people a very rich experience and a more personalized, curated experience. My goal will be to have a phone call with you, find out what you're looking for out of this hunt. Are there things that you want to learn? Is there gear that you want to get comfortable using? Do you want recommendations on the type of food that you should eat while we're away? And we will craft a hunt for you that fulfills your own personal goals. And there'll be a lot of one-on-one attention. It's not just a number. We're not just going to crank through a bunch of people. I want to keep this like a smaller size, high touch, business. So any questions, jay@mindfulhunter.com. I would love to help you build your next Canadian hunting adventure. Those are all the categories. I want to say this is a pretty straightforward review. Let's be honest. There is not a lot of difference between teepees. The shape is the shape. It's a pyramid-shaped fabric with a pole in the middle. There hasn't been a whole lot of developments in teepees in the last few hundred years. Now, we have seen some advances in the fabrics used for the teepees. I think the build quality of Argali is beyond reproach. I think the customer service, the pricing is phenomenal. I think some of the little design features are fantastic. And again, that sill poly is really what sets it apart for me. So I can say very safely, I strongly recommend this product if you are looking for a teepee. I'd love to know what other ones you're running, have run in the past. If you've run this one, what were your thoughts? Please drop a note in the comments section below. If you could help share and engage with this content in any way, like, comment, share, subscribe. I would greatly appreciate any help I can get bumping it up in the old algorithm. And as always, thank you for tuning in.